Have you ever said something and watched it land completely wrong? You thought you were being clear, but somehow the team missed it. Your spouse misunderstood it, and now you're cleaning up a mess you didn't even know you made to begin with. Most leaders think they're communicating clearly, but if you ever had your message misunderstood, misapplied, or ignored, you know how frustrating that gap can be. And for me, nobody ever taught me how to communicate clearly, not at home or at school, and definitely not at work, where results were rewarded, not clarity. So this is a 3-part video series on communication for leaders. So in today's video, we are talking about why I struggle to communicate clearly in normal day-to-day situations and what leadership lessons I've learned along the way. If you're new here, my name is Jared. I'm a high school teacher turned leadership coach. I help leaders develop themselves and their teams while having enough margin to be present at home. I really care about leadership in general because it's not just about work, it's about life. Who you are at work shapes who you are at home. And who you are at home influences how you show up at work. And that matters to me because at the end of the day, we're all gonna die. And if we get the gift of looking back on that future day, I highly doubt you or myself or any of us are gonna say, I wish I had done less meaningful work. I wish I'd spent more time in the office, less time at home. I wish I had led with less clarity. I wish I had been more distant from the people I love. I wish I had communicated less clearly. My point is that the work I do, and even watching this video now, is going to help that future day, and it will help you now, both at work and at home, where I think things really matter the most. Without any more preamble, let's dive into the first of 5 points that I have. My first point of why I struggle to communicate clearly is I was never taught to communicate clearly. Growing up, I wasn't taught how to communicate clearly, not in my family, not at school, and not even at work. At work, the only thing that really mattered was getting results. Whether or not my communication style was helpful didn't really matter, although I did find very quickly that good communication led to faster results. So in that sense, I learned it was efficient, but it wasn't a formal thing I was taught, as long as the job got done. I think what hit for me at work was pretty straightforward, that communication was something that was very efficient and helped me to be more effective. But it was something that was assumed rather than overtly explained to me. When it came to my life at home, this one took a while. Basically, I realized that I was communicating something, or at least I thought I was, and it didn't end up landing at home, literally with my kids as they got older, but definitely with my spouse early on. And this isn't so much as to blame shift people to say, I wasn't taught it, and so therefore it's not my fault. But even though it wasn't my fault, it is still my responsibility. Ditto for you. If you were never taught this, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to learn these lessons. But in a nutshell, that's the first reason why I didn't know about communication. The second reason why I struggled to communicate clearly was that my personality jumped too far ahead. I'm going to start with a quote here, and it says, when expectations are not clear and shared, people begin to become emotionally involved, and simple misunderstandings become compounded, turning into personality clashes and communication breakdowns. This quote, in a nutshell, is saying that if you are not communicating clearly, both with your expectations or the things you need or want, and you are assuming that those things are understood by the other person at work or at home, what will end up happening is things get really frustrated and compounding. So for me personally, I have a strength of strategic thinking. Essentially, I can think, see a situation, and see 4 to 5 steps ahead very quickly, very rapidly. The problem with that is that if I invite someone else into a conversation and I'm on, they started on step 1, my brain has literally landed to the most optimized solution here. Or at least I know why this option is bad and this option is bad and that one is bad, but this one is the ideal one. And I invite the other person, in this case, my spouse at home, I invite them in. I don't actually communicate well because I don't walk them through my reasoning for step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3 and step 4. Instead, I'm like, this is the right answer and this is why. Whereas I need to let them marinate with their options and going through that. Or that's option one, or option two. The other thing I can do is I can literally just walk them through my reasoning as to why those options aren't there. But I was doing these strategic options and thinking so quickly with everything ordinary. Why we ought to buy, I don't know, that one couch right now. And I've thought through that very rapidly as to why that was the best couch at the moment, given all the other parameters. And generally, again, I'm often wrong with so many things in my life, but when it comes to some strategic decisions, I'm pretty accurate about them and I have enough practice about it. But the frustration at home was that I was not giving my spouse enough time to think through those options, nor was I communicating those options. I thought everyone thought exactly like I do early on in my marriage. I think what I'm trying to say at the end of it is when I skip steps in my explanation, it creates confusion. People miss my logic and I miss the chance to connect with those people and walk them through that and also invite their thinking into that. As a result of that, at home, that created a big mess that took a lot of practice and years to disentangle. And then at work, what ended up happening is people didn't really ask me for clarity. At that moment, they just said, what is it that you want? Like, what's the bottom line? And let's just get there. They kind of walked with me through that because I had the results, but I was missing the relational aspects of inviting them into that journey. Before we get into our next point, I don't want you to just hear these ideas. I want to help you apply them in a conversational format. So I made a simple one-page guide that offers you 5 questions to self-assess with yourself and then 5 questions you can ask your key leaders to assess you. It looks something like this. It has a graphic. I'll have the original YouTube video when it's up linked on there. And then these are the 5 questions here at the bottom that you can actually use as a starting point to talk to your key leaders about this. One of the questions is for your self-assessment is, how often do I express what I'm really thinking and feeling, even when it's vulnerable? Or one of the questions you might ask your leader is, what's the one way I could improve how I communicate with you or the team? Like I said, I don't want you to just watch this video and do nothing with it. I actually want to help you apply it. So download this resource now using the link in the description below or the QR code that I am putting on the screen. My third point of why I struggle to communicate clearly as a leader is that communicating clearly feels really vulnerable. And again, I'm going to start with a quote here. The more authentic you become, the more genuine in your expression, particularly regarding personal experiences and even self-doubts, the more people can relate to your expression and the safer it makes them feel to express themselves. Dr. Stephen Covey is saying, the more vulnerable you are, the better your relationships are going to be. But this is the problem. For me, the more vulnerable I was the more I would be known and seen. And this is both at work and at home. This is not a full-length video of why that is difficult, but it's suffice it to say, it is hard to let your guard down and be known, to possibly be misunderstood because you were attempting to be understood. Being clear means putting your actual thoughts and feelings out there, and that can feel risky, especially in leadership roles where you're supposed to have it all together. In a paradigm where you have to have it all together, admitting confusion or emotion can feel like weakness. But what's interesting, and what the quote I think is hinting at, is that at the end of the day, leading with that kind of weakness will allow you to have more vulnerability, which will eventually, with proper handling of all of that in a functional work environment, that will actually lead you towards healthier communication and healthier relationships. And again, if you apply this at work, it would help you at home. This took me a number of years to realize that vulnerability was a strength in communication and not a weakness. I think the hardest part was realizing that I didn't have to have it all together, nor did I have to have the veneer of that. I learned that when I started practicing this appropriately and not at all times, that it allowed me to actually connect more with others, and that fostered relational deposits into our bank account a relational bank account, and eventually that allowed me to be more vulnerable and increased my communication. My last 2 points are the things I learned as a leader. So point number 4 for me is what I learned as a leader is that I needed to externalize my thinking. For me, I learned this point hard in therapy. Therapy taught me how to say what I was thinking, not just assume people understood me. And I think this goes back to the example I was saying earlier. So often, for many years, I thought a very particular way, which is not a bad thing. Again, I'm very strategic, so I very quickly look at my options and see my path forward. But at the same time, I wasn't allowing people to have their space to think through that. So instead, I needed to externalize my thinking and say, here is what is going through my head. I'm thinking about option 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm thinking of the splintering of those options altogether. Eventually, with time, I learned to ask people if I could share all those thoughts or if they needed space to think through on their own. I took a test a number of years ago called the Clifton Strength Finders, and that whole thing helped me realize that my brain processes strategy fast. But unless I say my steps out loud, people will get lost. In that process of externalizing, I also wanted to validate and ensure that they understood what I was saying. So in practice, what I actually started doing is I would say something like this. So I'm working on communication. I believe you have the capacity to understand what I said, but this is more for me than it is for you. Can you do me a favor? Can you just answer this question for me to make sure that I'm communicating clearly? What did you hear me say? Now, I'm not suggesting for you to do that everywhere all the time, but it's honestly a really helpful question. What did you hear me say? With enough practice and with enough time, all of this was reinforced that in order to communicate better, I needed to externalize my thoughts. Not all of them, and not at all times, and not with everyone, but with key leaders at key moments, I needed to share those thoughts. And this leads me to point number 5 of what I learned as a leader. That's pretty basic, that communication is an ongoing practice. The quote that I want to start with is from Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, and she says, practicing self-compassion and having patience with ourselves are essential in this process. I start with that because 1, we need to practice all the time. 2, you're gonna mess up. And then 3, you have to practice self-compassion. Communication is not something that I've mastered and then moved on. This is something we practice daily. It's ongoing, it's imperfect. Even now today, as I'm on this end sharing these thoughts, it is great if I get it right about 50% of the time. And I'm hoping to increase that this year to 51%. And then on and on and on. I have to revisit this constantly. For me, when I'm really stressed, I default to speed and not to clarity. So I don't communicate well when I am really stressed because I am just rushing to get stuff done. It's okay to need to reset. What matters is choosing to keep doing the work after you mess up or don't communicate well. Don't let one failure stop you from the practice. Hopefully all of this has been inspiring for you to stop unclear communication and start listening more. At this point, you might be saying, this is all great, but how do I get started on this? That's why I created a resource I mentioned earlier, and it's a file called the Communication Audit. I already shared there's 5 questions to assess with yourself, and then there's 5 questions you can ask your key leaders to help them as a group assess themselves. You can download it now using the link in the description below or the QR code that I'm throwing on the screen. So in this video, we explored why I personally struggle to communicate clearly and what I've learned along the way as a leader. My first point is that I was never taught to communicate clearly. The second one was that my personality jumped really far ahead. And the third reason is that communication for me and for many others feels really vulnerable. And then my fourth and fifth point is what I learned along the way is that I needed to externalize my thinking and that communication is an ongoing and regular practice. Now that we've talked about why clear communication is so hard, it's time to talk about how to do it better. So I'm putting a video on the screen that is titled, How I Learned to Communicate Better as a Leader. So if you want a very practical way to make the shift, go ahead and click on that video right over there. If it's not up yet, go ahead and get subscribed so you can find out when it comes out. I will see you guys right over there in that video.